The city lights sparkled below like scattered diamonds, but Daniel Hayes saw only red. He stood in the marble-floored penthouse living room, his mother's words still echoing in his ears like a death sentence to everything he'd ever wanted. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Legos sprawled beneath them, 7 floors down, close enough to hear the evening traffic, far enough to forget the world existed. "You're giving it all away?" His voice cracked, the carefully maintained charm dissolving like sugar in rain. "Everything Dad built. Everything you fought for? To strangers?" Evelyn Hayes turned from the balcony doorway, her silver-streaked hair catching the lamplight. At 58, she still carried herself with the grace of a woman who'd clawed her way up from nothing, who'd turned her late husband's failing export business into a continental empire. Her eyes, those warm brown eyes that used to read him bedtime stories, now held something Daniel couldn't bear to see. Disappointment. "Not strangers, Daniel. The Children's Foundation. The scholarship program your father and I always dreamed of." She moved toward him, her hand reaching out. "Sweetheart, you have your own career, your own money. This is about legacy, about giving back." "My own money?" Daniel laughed, bitter and sharp. "You mean the allowance you dole out like I'm still 12? The trust fund you control?" "Mother, I'm 28 years old. If you're watching this, stay with me, because what happens next will chill you to your core. This is a story about love twisted into something unrecognizable, about a son who couldn't see the treasure he already had. Hit that like button, subscribe, and please share this. Someone needs to hear this warning." The argument had been building for weeks, ever since Daniel overheard her lawyer on the phone discussing the will amendments. 28 years of feeling second place to boardrooms and charity galas, to his father's memory and his mother's mission. 28 years of watching her pour love into everything except him. Or so he'd convinced himself. "You loved him more than me," Daniel said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "Even after he walked out for 6 months before the accident, even after he made you cry every night for years, you still worship his memory. You built this empire in his name, not mine." Evelyn's face softened with pain. "Oh, Daniel, that's not true. Your father was complicated, yes, but he came back. He was trying. He abandoned us." Daniel's shout ricocheted off the marble. "And you forgave him. You always forgave him. But me? Nothing I do is ever enough for you." The words hung between them like smoke from a fire neither could extinguish. Evelyn stepped closer, tears forming in her eyes. "Baby, I love you more than life itself. Everything I've done has been for you." "Then change the will." Silence. Heavy and suffocating. "I can't do that," Evelyn whispered. "Daniel, you need to understand. There are things in place, protections I've arranged. You're provided for, I promise you. But this foundation is important. It's about helping children who have nothing, who matter more than your own son." "That's not what I said. It's what you meant." Daniel grabbed the whiskey glass from the side table, his hand shaking. He'd been drinking since he found the lawyer's papers that afternoon, liquid courage mixing with liquid rage. "All my life, Mother. All my life I've been second. Second to Dad's legacy. Second to your work. Second to everyone you save, while I'm just here, waiting for you to see me." Evelyn moved toward the balcony, needing air, needing space from the accusation in her son's eyes. The Lagos night breeze caught her silk scarf, and for a moment, she looked small, vulnerable. "Daniel, please calm down. Let's talk about this tomorrow." When what? When you've given everything away. When I'm left with nothing but memories of a mother who loved the world more than me." He followed her outside. The balcony jutted out from the penthouse like a platform suspended in the stars. Below, car horns echoed. Someone's radio played high-life music. Normal life, carrying on, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding in the clouds. "I need you to leave," Evelyn said quietly, her back to him, hands gripping the railing. "Go sleep this off. We'll discuss it in the morning." Something in Daniel snapped. Perhaps it was the dismissal, the way she turned away as if he were a child throwing a tantrum. Perhaps it was the years of perceived neglect crystallizing into this single moment. Perhaps it was the whiskey, or the greed, or the darkness that lives in every human heart waiting for its chance to emerge. He didn't plan it. That's what he'd tell himself later. He didn't walk onto that balcony intending to become a murderer. But when Evelyn turned slightly, one hand releasing the railing to brush away a tear, When she looked at him with that mixture of love and disappointment that had haunted his childhood, something primal and ugly surged through him. His hands moved before his conscience could stop them. One push, not even hard, just enough to break her balance, to send her one step too far back, too close to the edge where the railing dipped lower for the decorative planter boxes. Her eyes widened, not with fear at first, but with heartbreak, with recognition, with a mother's final, devastating understanding of what her child had become. Daniel, his name, half question, half forgiveness, cut short by her sharp intake of breath. She reached for him even as she fell. Her fingers brushed his shirt, grasping at nothing but air and shattered dreams. Then gravity claimed her, and Evelyn Hayes plummeted 7 floors into the Lagos night, her screams swallowed by the city's indifferent roar. Daniel stood frozen, his hands still extended, his mind refusing to process what they'd done. Below, he heard the sickening thud, then the screams beginning. Car brakes squealing, chaos erupting like a wound in the evening calm. He looked at his palms as if they belonged to someone else. In the reflection of the balcony glass, he saw his father's eyes staring back at him. The same cold calculation his mother had once forgiven. The same darkness she'd fought her whole life to keep from infecting her son. She'd failed, and now everything was his. The police came within minutes, their sirens wailing up through the night like the city itself was mourning. Daniel descended the interior stairs on autopilot, his legs moving through muscle memory while his mind fractured into 1,000 sharp pieces. By the time he reached the lobby, he'd constructed his story, crafted it the way his mother had once taught him to build business presentations, every detail supporting the narrative. She was upset, he told the first officer, letting his voice crack in exactly the right places. About the foundation, about giving so much away. I tried to calm her down, but she went out to the balcony for air. I was inside, making tea, and then I heard. He covered his face, shoulders shaking with what the officers would interpret as grief. Beneath his palms, his eyes were dry. The building's security footage showed them arguing. Yes, but the balcony itself had no cameras. Evelyn had insisted on privacy in her sanctuary space. The angle from the lobby camera showed only Daniel entering the penthouse behind his mother, nothing more. The neighbors reported raised voices, but couldn't distinguish words. One witness, Mrs. Okafor from 6B, mentioned seeing Evelyn on the balcony alone moments before, looking distressed. Perfect. Tragic. Convenient. They ruled it suicide within 48 hours. Grief-stricken philanthropist, overwhelmed by the weight of her charitable ambitions, takes her own life. The newspapers painted her as a martyr to her own generosity. Business mogul dies in apparent suicide. Legacy of giving ends in tragedy. Daniel kept every clipping, arranged them in a leather folder as if they were trophies. The funeral was elaborate. Daniel played his part flawlessly. The devastated son, the sole survivor, the young man suddenly burdened with an empire he never asked for. 300 people attended, filling the cathedral with their sympathetic murmurs and their curious glances. They watched him sob at the eulogy, watched him collapse at the graveside, watched him perform grief like a masterclass in deception. She was everything to me, he told the crowd, his voice breaking beautifully. My mother, my mentor, my world. I don't know how to exist in a universe without her light. The irony tasted like copper on his tongue. Within a week, Daniel met with the lawyers. Mr. Adeyemi, his mother's senior counsel, sat across from him in the oak-paneled office, sympathy etched into every line of his weathered face. Your mother was a remarkable woman, Daniel. What happened is beyond tragic. I know. Daniel straightened his black tie, noting how well the morning suit fit him. He'd had it tailored 3 days after her death. I want to honor her wishes, whatever they were. Mr. Adeyemi opened the will portfolio, but something flickered across his expression, too quick for Daniel to read. The charitable foundation she mentioned, the Children's Foundation. I want to proceed with it, Daniel interrupted smoothly. Modified, of course, but in her memory. It's what she would have wanted. The lie came easily. Let them think he was noble. Let the foundation exist on paper while he controlled the purse strings, doling out minimal amounts to maintain appearances. The bulk of the estate, the mansion, the businesses, the investment portfolios, would be his to command. That's very generous, Mr. Adeyemi said slowly. However, There are complications with the estate that we need to discuss. Your mother had established certain structures, trusts with specific conditions. I'll need several weeks to compile everything properly." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Of course. Take the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." How could he? The penthouse was now his throne, the empire his kingdom. He'd waited 28 years. He could wait a few more weeks. But the mansion, his mother's pride, the sprawling estate in Ikoyi where she'd hosted dignitaries and fundraisers, that became accessible immediately as her sole heir and resident. Daniel moved through its halls like a conqueror, finally free to touch the antiques she'd forbidden him to handle as a child, to drink from the crystal she'd saved for special guests, to sleep in the master bedroom where she'd spent countless nights planning her charitable empire. The first night, he slept soundly. Victory tasted sweet. The second night, he woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. He sat up, heart hammering, listening. The footsteps stopped outside his door, her old room, now his. Then silence. When he finally mustered courage to check, the hallway was empty. Just old house sounds, he told himself. Settling foundations. Shifting wood. The third night, he heard her voice. Not loud, not dramatic, just a whisper, carried on the air conditioning's breath. "Daniel, sweetheart, come here." The same tone she'd used when he was 5 and afraid of thunderstorms, when she'd comfort him despite exhausted from 18-hour workdays. He searched every room, switching on every light, but found nothing. No one. Just shadows that seemed to watch him with his mother's disappointed eyes. The business proved easier to control than the mansion's ghosts. Daniel called emergency board meetings, presented himself as the grieving but capable successor. Most of the directors, older men who'd worked with his father, saw him as the rightful heir. They approved his proposals, signed his documents, authorized his access to accounts that represented more wealth than he'd ever imagined. "Your mother would be proud," the chairman said, shaking Daniel's hand after a particularly successful acquisition meeting. "You have her instinct, her drive." Daniel smiled. But that night, every light in the mansion flickered simultaneously when he returned home. The chandelier in the foyer, his mother's favorite, imported from Venice, swayed despite the still air. In the kitchen, he found the tea kettle boiling though he'd touched nothing. She'd always made tea when upset. Always. He unplugged it, but 2 hours later, steam was rising from the spout again, the kettle heating on its cold, disconnected base. "Stop it," Daniel whispered to the empty kitchen. "You're gone. You chose the balcony. You chose to leave." The lies felt filmier with each repetition, as if the mansion itself rejected them. The fourth week after her death, his first major business deal began to collapse. The Singapore shipping contract, worth $12 million, suddenly withdrew. No explanation. The partner, a Chinese businessman named Wei, simply stopped returning calls. When Daniel finally reached him, Wei's voice was cold. "I saw your mother in my dream last night. She was disappointed in you. I cannot do business with someone who disappoints the dead." Superstitious nonsense. Cultural differences. Daniel told himself this repeatedly, but 3 more partners vanished that month, each with stories that made his blood run cold, each mentioning Evelyn, each describing her exact words. "Watch my son. He's not what he seems." The mansion grew darker despite the Lagos sun. Shadows pooled in corners where light should reach. Her perfume, jasmine and sandalwood, drifted through rooms she'd loved. The study, where she'd worked late into countless nights, became unbearable. Every time Daniel entered, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. Papers would scatter despite closed windows. The portrait of her above the mantel seemed to follow him, her painted eyes accusing, knowing, mourning not her own death, but his corruption. He started drinking. Heavily. The same whiskey that had fueled his courage on the balcony now fueled his denial. "She's gone," he'd tell his reflection at 2 a.m., bottle in hand. "Dead people don't come back. Ghosts aren't real." But her voice persisted, always at the edge of hearing. In the shower's rush of water. In the garden's rustling leaves. In the silence between his heartbeats. "Daniel, what have you done? Daniel, I forgive you. Daniel, why couldn't you wait?" That last phrase haunted him most. Wait for what? For her to die naturally? For some mythical inheritance that would never come? The mansion he'd murdered for had become his prison, and he'd only just begun serving his sentence. 2 months after Evelyn's death, Daniel stopped sleeping in the master bedroom. He told himself it was practical. The guest room had better morning light, less street noise, but the truth settled in his bones like winter cold. Every night in that room, he felt her presence beside the bed, standing where she used to read before sleeping, her disappointment thicker than the Legos' humidity. The mansion's rebellion grew bolder. Doors he'd locked would swing open at dawn. Family photographs rearranged themselves on the mantel, always positioning his childhood pictures next to hers, as if the house itself was reminding him of who he used to be before greed hollowed him out. The grand piano in the music room, untouched since his father's death 15 years ago, began playing single notes at midnight. Always the same melody, the lullaby his mother had sung when he was small, when love between them was simple and uncontaminated by resentment. "You're losing it," Daniel muttered to himself, standing in the music room at 3 a.m., watching the keys depress by themselves. Stress, guilt, psychology, not the supernatural. But his hands shook as he unplugged the electronic piano, and the melody continued, acoustic now. Impossible, the hammer striking strings with invisible fingers that knew every note by heart. He called a priest. Father Okoro arrived on a humid Tuesday afternoon, carrying holy water and blessed oil, his round face creased with concern. Daniel had donated generously to the parish, blood money disguised as charity, and the priest came quickly, asking few questions. "Tell me what you've experienced, my son," Father Okoro said, settling into Evelyn's favorite armchair without invitation. The chair that had molded itself to her shape over decades of evening reading. Daniel recited the events clinically, omitting the balcony, editing the narrative to cast himself as innocent victim of unexplained phenomena. "My mother was very spiritual," he finished. "Maybe she's just checking on things, making sure the house is maintained." Father Okoro's eyes were knowing. "The dead don't linger without reason, Daniel. Unfinished business, unspoken truth, injustice demanding voice." He blessed each room, murmuring prayers in Latin and Yoruba, sealing doorways and windows with sacred oil. "If your conscience is clear, this should bring peace." That night, every window in the mansion shattered simultaneously. Daniel woke to the sound of breaking glass, a crystalline explosion that rained shards across marble and hardwood floors. No storm, no earthquake, just deliberate, furious destruction that left him standing in the hallway, bleeding from a cut on his bare foot, understanding that his mother's spirit, if spirits existed, was not interested in peace. The priest didn't return his calls after that. Business continued its strange deterioration. The Hayes Export Company, profitable for 30 years, began hemorrhaging money. Shipments arrived damaged despite proper packaging. Warehouses flooded during the dry season. Clients who'd been loyal to Evelyn for decades suddenly discovered discrepancies in decade-old contracts. Minor issues that should have been irrelevant, but somehow mushroomed into legal nightmares. Daniel's lawyer, a sharp young woman named Chioma, sat across from him in the downtown office, her expression troubled. "Mr. Hayes, I don't understand what's happening. It's like the business itself is rejecting your management. Every decision you make, even sound ones, somehow backfires." "That's ridiculous," Daniel snapped, but he'd thought the same thing. The empire his mother had built was crumbling in his hands like sand, as if her will alone had held it together, and without her blessing, the whole structure was collapsing. "Maybe you need a break," Chioma suggested gently. "Grief does strange things. You lost your mother suddenly. No one expects you to." "I'm fine." He stood abruptly, ending the meeting. Fine was a lie he told himself hourly, a mantra against the growing darkness in his mind. The mansion's haunting evolved. No longer content with whispers and footsteps, Evelyn's presence became visual. He'd glimpse her in mirrors, not his reflection but her, standing behind him, her face sad rather than angry. Once, passing the balcony doorway, he saw her clearly, standing at the railing in the same silk scarf she'd worn that night, looking back at him with infinite sorrow. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the first honest words he'd spoken since her death. "I'm so sorry, Mama." But she faded like morning mist, and the apology hung in empty air, unaccepted, insufficient. His friends, the few he had, noticed the change. Marcus, his university roommate, confronted him over drinks at their usual spot in Victoria Island. "Daniel, you look terrible. When's the last time you slept?" Ate properly. I'm managing an empire, Marcus. Sleep is luxury. Your mother managed it and still had time for herself. This isn't management. This is obsession. Marcus leaned forward, lowering his voice. People are talking. They say you're seeing things, hearing things. They say the Hayes mansion is cursed now. Daniel laughed bitterly. Cursed by what? Guilt? Conscience? Tell them I'm fine. But he wasn't fine. His reflection showed a stranger, hollow-eyed, gaunt, aged a decade in 2 months. His hands developed a tremor he couldn't control. Food tasted like ash. The whiskey he drank to numb the fear only amplified it, turning shadows into accusers and silence into indictment. The worst came on a Wednesday night, exactly 10 weeks after her death. Daniel was working late in the study, reviewing contracts by lamplight, when he felt breath on his neck. Not imagined. Real. Warm. Carrying the scent of jasmine perfume. Daniel. Her voice, clear now, undeniable. Look at me, sweetheart. He spun, and she was there. Not translucent. Not ghostly. Solid and real as if death had been only a misunderstanding. Evelyn stood 3 feet away, wearing the blue dress she'd been buried in, her face peaceful despite everything. You're not real, he gasped. Your guilt. Stress. Hallucination. I'm your mother, she said simply. And I need you to understand what you've done. I know what I did. The confession exploded from him, tears finally breaking through the dam he'd built. I killed you. I pushed you. I murdered my own mother for money I didn't even need. Is that what you want to hear? I'm a monster. Evelyn's expression softened with the same love that had defined his childhood. Oh, Daniel, that's not why I'm here. Then why? He collapsed into the desk chair, broken. Why haunt me? Why destroy everything? Just let me rot in my guilt. Isn't that punishment enough? I'm not here to punish you, baby. She moved closer, and he could swear he felt her hand touch his hair, the way she used to when he was small and scared. I'm here because you need to know the truth before it destroys you completely. The truth about what you killed me for. Cold flooded Daniel's veins. What truth? The inheritance, Daniel. The estate. Everything you thought I was giving away. Her voice carried infinite sadness. There's something you need to see. Something I prepared for you long before that night. Something that will make you understand exactly what you've done. She pointed to the portrait above the mantel, her official portrait from her 50th birthday. Behind that painting. Look behind it, and you'll find what I've been trying to tell you since I fell. Then she vanished, not fading but simply ceasing to exist between one moment and the next, leaving only jasmine perfume and the echo of her voice. I loved you enough to protect you from yourself, but you never waited long enough to see how much. Daniel stood on shaking legs and approached the portrait. His mother's painted eyes watched him with an expression he finally recognized, not disappointment, but foreknowledge. She'd known. Somehow, she'd known what he might become, and she'd prepared for it anyway. With trembling hands, he lifted the heavy frame from its hooks. Behind it, set into the wall, was a small safe he'd never known existed. The combination lock gleamed in the lamplight, waiting, mocking, promising answers that would cost more than questions ever had. He tried his birthday, September 15th, 1997. Nothing. Her birthday. Their anniversary. The day she'd adopted him after his father's death. Nothing worked. Frustrated, desperate, he tried the last combination he could think of, the date of her death. September 9th, 2025. The safe clicked open, revealing a single sealed envelope. His name written in her elegant script across the front, and below it, words that made his heart stop. To be opened on your 30th birthday. But if you're reading this now, then my worst fears have come true. Daniel's hands shook so badly he could barely break the seal. Inside were documents, legal papers, and a letter. Her handwriting filled 3 pages, and as he began reading, the mansion seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment when Daniel Hayes would finally understand the true cost of his greed. Daniel's vision blurred as he read the first line of his mother's letter. The paper felt alive in his hands, pulsing with accusation and love in equal measure. Outside, thunder rolled across Lagos despite the dry season, as if the heavens themselves were bearing witness to the unraveling of a son's soul. My dearest Daniel, the letter began. If you're reading this before your 30th birthday, then something has gone terribly wrong. Either I've died unexpectedly, or you found this in desperation. Either way, My heart breaks for both of us." He sank to the floor, back against the wall beneath her portrait, and continued reading through tears that came without permission. "I need to tell you about your father. Not the sanitized version I gave you as a child, but the truth. Richard didn't just abandon us for 6 months when you were 13. He stole from the company, nearly destroyed everything I'd built. He took $2 million and disappeared with a woman from his office, leaving us with debts and scandal that almost buried us both." Daniel's breath caught. She told him his father had a business crisis to resolve abroad. Never this. Never betrayal so profound. When he came back, broken and begging forgiveness, I had a choice. Prosecute and destroy him, or forgive and rebuild. I chose forgiveness, Daniel, not because I was weak, but because I saw in his eyes the same fear I sometimes saw in yours. The fear of never being enough, of always disappointing everyone. I chose to show him grace. And in those final 2 years before the accident, he became the man I'd always believed he could be. He died trying to prove he was worthy of that second chance. The words swam on the page. Daniel wiped his eyes, but more tears came, an ocean of grief for the parents he'd misunderstood, for the son he'd failed to become. "I've watched you struggle with resentment since you were 18. You thought I loved my work more than you, that I valued strangers over my own son. The truth is harder to hear. I was terrified of you, not of who you were, but of who you might become. I saw your father's weaknesses in you, the hunger for validation, the tendency toward bitterness, the way you measured love in material terms. I saw it, and I tried desperately to teach you different values, but I fear I only pushed you further away." A sound escaped Daniel's throat, half sob, half groan. She'd known. She'd seen the darkness in him and still loved him anyway. "So I made arrangements. The estate, the businesses, everything. It's all held in trust for you until your 30th birthday. Not as punishment, Daniel, but as protection. By 30, I hoped you'd have matured enough to handle wealth with wisdom, to understand that money is responsibility, not freedom. The charitable foundation I mentioned? It's a legal structure designed to shelter assets and provide you with secure income while teaching you stewardship. You were never going to lose anything, my darling. I was trying to ensure you gained everything, including character." The room spun. Daniel pressed his forehead to his knees, the letter crumpling in his grip. Every assumption that had driven him to that balcony, every justification he'd constructed, every moment of righteous anger, all built on lies he'd told himself because listening was harder than judging. "Mr. Adeyemi has all the documentation. On your 30th birthday, September 15th, 2027, full control transfers to you. Until then, the trust provides you with a generous salary and growth opportunities in the business. It's not abandonment, sweetheart. It's an investment in the man I know you can become. 2 more years." She'd planned to gift him everything in just 2 more years, and he'd killed her rather than wait. The irony was so brutal it felt like a physical blow. "I love you more than breath itself, Daniel. More than any empire or legacy. If something has happened to me before you read this at 30, please know that my greatest regret is not having more time to show you how much. And if you've done something terrible, if the darkness I feared has consumed you, please know there is always redemption, always forgiveness, always a path back to light, if you're brave enough to take it." The letter was signed simply, "Your mother, forever and always." Daniel's screams echoed through the mansion, raw and animal, the sound of a soul tearing itself apart. He'd murdered the only person who'd truly loved him, who'd protected him even from himself, who'd built him a future while he was too blind with entitlement to see it. The remaining documents confirmed everything. Trust papers dated 3 years prior, naming him as sole beneficiary. Business succession plans that position him as CEO in training with phased authority increases. Investment portfolios already generating enough passive income to live comfortably while he learned. She'd given him everything, just with patience and wisdom he'd lacked the maturity to appreciate. He didn't know how long he sat there, drowning in truth too heavy to surface from. Eventually, headlights swept across the study windows, a car arriving unannounced. Daniel heard the front door open without knocking, footsteps approaching with purpose. Mr. Adeyemi appeared in the study doorway, his expression grave. Behind him stood a younger man Daniel didn't recognize, carrying a briefcase and an official-looking folder. "Daniel, The lawyer said quietly. "We need to talk." I'd hoped to wait longer, but given recent events, I think it's time. Recent events? Daniel's voice was hoarse from screaming. Business partners withdrawing. Property damage. Your erratic behavior. Mr. Adeyemi entered the room, saw the open safe, the scattered papers, and nodded slowly. You found her letter. You knew what I did." The lawyer's face remained neutral. "I know what happened on the balcony, yes. The security footage from the building across the street, the one under construction with cameras facing this direction, captured everything. The angle the police couldn't see." Ice flooded Daniel's veins. "Why haven't you gone to the police?" "Because your mother made me promise something before she died." Mr. Adeyemi settled into a chair, gesturing for his companion to wait outside. 3 weeks before her death, she came to my office. Said she was worried about you, about what you might do if you discovered the trust arrangements. She made me swear that if anything happened to her, I would give you a choice. What choice? Confession or consequences? Prison or penance? The lawyer pulled documents from his jacket. "This is a full confession, pre-written, requiring only your signature. You sign it, I deliver it to the authorities, and you face trial for what you did. That's the justice route. Clean, legal, punitive." Daniel's hands shook. "And the other option? You dedicate your life to the foundation she wanted to build. Not on paper, truly. You liquidate enough assets to fully fund the children's foundation with $50 million. You work there, not as a figurehead, but as a genuine employee, helping the children she wanted to save. You do this for the rest of your life, and I keep the footage sealed." "That's not justice," Daniel whispered. "No," Mr. Adeyemi agreed. "It's mercy, the kind your mother showed your father. The kind she hoped you'd learn before it was too late. She believed, even in her final moments, I have to believe this, that you could be redeemed, that the son she raised was still in there somewhere, buried under bitterness, but not dead. Not yet." Daniel looked at the confession papers, then at his mother's letter still clutched in his hand. Her words echoed. There is always redemption, always forgiveness. But did he deserve either? Could any amount of charity erase murder? Could helping other children replace the mother he'd stolen from himself? "I need time," he managed. "You have 48 hours, Mr. Adeyemi said, standing. "After that, I make the choice for you. Your mother asked me to give you this option, Daniel, but she also asked me to ensure justice was served, one way or another. Don't waste the gift she's giving you. Even from beyond death, she's still trying to save you." The lawyer left, his footsteps fading down the marble hallway. Daniel sat alone in the study, surrounded by the evidence of his mother's love and his own monstrous ingratitude. The mansion was silent now, no whispers, no footsteps, no piano melodies. As if Evelyn herself was waiting to see what choice her son would make, holding her breath in whatever realm the dead inhabited, hoping against hope that the boy she'd raised wasn't completely lost. Daniel looked up at her portrait, and for the first time since the balcony, he saw her clearly. Not the victim, not the obstacle, but the woman who'd fought her whole life to give him everything, including a final chance at redemption even after he'd taken everything from her. "Tell me what to do, Mama," he whispered to the painted eyes. "Tell me how to live with what I've become." But the portrait offered no answers. That choice, like all the ones that mattered, was his alone to make. Daniel didn't sleep for 48 hours. He wandered the mansion like a ghost haunting his own life, the confession papers in one hand, his mother's letter in the other. Two futures balanced on a razor's edge, imprisonment or penance, justice or mercy, death of the body or death of the self he'd become. On the first night, he stood on the balcony where it happened. 7 floors up, the Lagos lights sprawling below like fallen stars. He could still see her reaching for him, hear the half-question in her voice before gravity claimed her. The railing felt cold under his palms, and for a moment, he understood the seduction of joining her, of ending the guilt, the haunting, the unbearable weight of knowing he'd destroyed the only pure love he'd ever received. "Is that what you want?" he asked the night. "Me dead too? Would that balance the scales?" But the wind offered no answer, and something in him, maybe the last ember of the boy she'd raised, refused to take that coward's exit. She died because of his choices. He would live with them. That was the least he owed her. On the second night, he visited her grave. The cemetery was empty at 2 a.m., just Daniel, and the marble headstone he'd commissioned with money that was rightfully his, but felt stolen nonetheless. Evelyn Hayes, 1967 to 2025. Beloved mother, visionary philanthropist, forever loved. Forever loved. The irony of those words, ordered by the son who'd killed her, carved into stone as if saying them made them true. I don't know what to do, he confessed to the earth covering her. Prison might be easier. I pay my debt, society's satisfied, and maybe I sleep at night knowing I faced consequences. But the foundation, his voice broke. Working with children when I destroyed my own mother? Who am I to help anyone? The cemetery was silent except for the rustle of leaves and trees she'd never see again. But in that silence, Daniel heard the answer, not from ghosts or supernatural intervention, but from memory. A conversation when he was 9, after he'd broken a neighbor's window with a cricket ball and wanted to hide rather than confess. Courage isn't absence of fear, Daniel, she'd told him, kneeling to his eye level. It's doing the right thing even when you're terrified. Especially then. That's when character is built. In the moments we'd rather run but choose to stand instead. He'd confessed to the neighbor, worked odd jobs all summer to pay for the window, and learned that integrity sometimes costs everything but buys something invaluable. She taught him that. Before resentment poisoned him, before greed made him monstrous, she taught him how to be human. Maybe he'd forgotten, but maybe forgetting wasn't permanent. Maybe redemption was possible, not as erasure of sin, but as commitment to becoming someone who'd never committed again. The 48th hour arrived with dawn breaking over Lagos. Daniel sat in Mr. Adeyemi's office, the lawyer watching him with the patient intensity of a judge awaiting verdict. The confession papers lay on the desk between them, and signed. The foundation documents sat beside them. $50 million, irrevocable donation, lifetime commitment to service. I've made my decision, Daniel said, his voice steady for the first time in months. Mr. Adeyemi nodded slowly. Tell me. I'll do both. The lawyer's eyebrows rose. That wasn't one of the options. I don't care. Daniel leaned forward, and something in his eyes, something broken and rebuilding simultaneously, made the older man listen. I'll fund the foundation fully. I'll work there, genuinely, for as long as I live. But I'll also confess. Not the pre-written version, my own words. I'll tell them what I did, why I did it, and I'll face trial. If they convict me, I'll serve the time. If they show mercy, I'll dedicate every free moment to the children she wanted to help. Either way, the truth comes out. Daniel, you'll lose everything. Your freedom, your reputation, the business. I already lost everything that mattered when she hit the ground. Daniel's voice was quiet but absolute. Prison or not, I'm serving a life sentence. At least this way, some good comes from the evil I've done. At least the children benefit regardless of what happens to me. Mr. Adeyemi studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Your mother would have appreciated this choice. Not because it's easy, but because it's honest. She valued truth above everything, even when it cost her. It cost her life, Daniel said bitterly, because her son couldn't wait 2 years to receive what was always his. No, the lawyer corrected gently. It cost her life because she loved you enough to trust you with hard truths. And sometimes love makes us vulnerable to the people we trust most. That's not her failure, Daniel. That's yours to carry and, if possible, to transform. 3 months later, Daniel stood in a courtroom, confessing to voluntary manslaughter. The trial became national news. Heir confesses to mother's murder. And the public reaction was savage. How could he? What monster kills the woman who gave him everything? The social media storms raged, calling for maximum sentences, for justice, for blood. But something unexpected happened. The Children's Foundation, now fully funded and operational, began changing lives. 20 scholarships awarded in the first month. A new school built in a Lagos slum. Medical care for orphans who'd had nothing. And at every ribbon cutting, every graduation ceremony, there was Daniel's face alongside Evelyn's. Not celebrating his role, but documenting his penance. Some people understood. Most didn't. But understanding wasn't the point anymore. The judge, a stern woman who'd known Evelyn professionally, sentenced him to 8 years with possibility of parole after 5. Lenient by some standards, harsh by others. Daniel accepted it without appeal, and as the bailiffs led him away, he looked back at the gallery where his mother's photograph was displayed as evidence. I'm sorry, Mama, he mouthed. I'll try to be worth your love. Finally, in prison, Daniel worked in the educational programs, teaching other inmates to read, helping them prepare for reintegration. He wrote letters to the Foundation's scholarship recipients, sharing his story as cautionary tale. How greed destroys, how patience rewards, how love given freely is more valuable than any inheritance. 5 years passed. The parole board, swayed by his genuine transformation and the Foundation's continued success, granted early release. Daniel emerged into a world that hadn't forgotten his crime, but had watched his penance. The Foundation had grown under professional management he'd appointed, and they welcomed him back, not as a leader, but as a volunteer, working alongside the staff who'd turned his blood money into genuine hope. He never returned to the mansion, sold it, donated the proceeds to expand the Foundation's reach. He lived simply now, in a modest apartment in Surulere, taking the bus to work each morning like everyone else. The empire his mother had built was managed by trustees for the Foundation's benefit. The wealth he'd killed for went to children who needed it more than he ever had. 10 years after that night on the balcony, Daniel stood at a graduation ceremony for the Foundation's first university cohort. 23 young people, children who'd had nothing, now holding degrees and building futures. One of them, a young woman named Blessing, approached him afterward. "Mr. Hayes, I wanted to thank you. Without this foundation, I'd still be selling water on the streets. Now I'm a teacher. I can help others the way you helped me." Daniel's throat tightened. "I didn't help you, Blessing. My mother did. I'm just trying to honor her memory. By living differently than you did before." Blessing smiled with wisdom beyond her years. "That's still help. That's still hope. You can't undo the past, sir, but you're building a different future. That counts for something." Maybe it did. Not forgiveness. He'd never forgive himself, and that was appropriate. Not redemption. Some sins are too deep for that word. But transformation, perhaps. Growth from the ashes of who he'd been. A life lived in service to the memory of love he'd betrayed but finally, belatedly, learned to honor. That night, Daniel visited his mother's grave for the 1000th time. The headstone was weathered now, covered in flowers left by Foundation beneficiaries who knew her story. He added his single white rose, his weekly tradition, and sat on the grass beside her. "I'm 40 years old today, Mama," he said quietly. "You wanted me to have the inheritance at 30. I killed you at 28. But maybe the real inheritance wasn't the money or the empire. Maybe it was the lesson I learned too late. That love given freely is the only wealth that matters. That patience is wisdom. That you were trying to give me everything by teaching me to deserve it." The evening breeze rustled through the cemetery trees, carrying the scent of jasmine. Maybe coincidence. Maybe not. Daniel chose to believe she heard him, wherever she was, and that perhaps some small part of her could see what he'd become. Not the monster who'd pushed her, but the man trying desperately to honor what she'd taught him before darkness won. He would carry the guilt forever. That was his to bear. But he would also carry forward her legacy, her vision, her love for children who needed champions. Not because it absolved him, nothing could, but because it was the only way to make his continued existence mean something beyond the crime that had defined him. As Daniel walked out of the cemetery, the last light of day painted the sky in shades of gold and purple. Behind him, on Evelyn's grave, the white rose caught the light, a small beauty in a place of endings, a reminder that even from death and destruction, something worthwhile might grow if tended with enough sorrow and enough resolve. Dear friend watching this story unfold, Daniel's journey teaches us what we pray we never learn through experience. That some mistakes can never be unmade, only lived with. That love, once destroyed, leaves a wound no amount of good deeds can fully heal. But here's the encouragement in this darkness. Transformation is always possible. Not easy, not comfortable, not complete, but it is possible. Daniel couldn't bring his mother back, couldn't erase his crime, couldn't become innocent again, but he could become different. He could choose, each day, to honor what he'd destroyed by building something meaningful from the ruins. If you're carrying guilt for harm you've caused, know this: you can't undo it, but you can grow beyond who you were when you did it. You can make different choices going forward. You can dedicate yourself to becoming someone your past self wouldn't recognize, someone better, wiser, more compassionate. Evelyn's greatest gift to her son wasn't the inheritance he murdered her for. It was the final lesson, learned in agony, that patience, love, and character are worth more than any empire. That waiting for good things is wisdom. That the people who truly love us are preparing us for blessings we're too immature to see. If this story moved you, if it made you think about inheritance, not just of money but of values, of love, of the legacies we leave, please hit that like button. Subscribe to hear more stories that challenge us to be better. Share this with someone who needs to hear that transformation, though painful, is possible. And comment below, what inheritance matters most to you? Not what you'll receive, but what you'll leave behind. Thank you for staying with Daniel's painful journey. May we all learn patience before desperation teaches us its value. May we recognize love before we destroy it. And may we remember that the greatest wealth is always the people who believe in us, even when we've forgotten how to believe in ourselves. Until next time, choose patience, choose love, choose to become worthy of the blessings already headed your way.